The GOP has grown saltier as the public succeeds in pressuring more and more companies and corporations to speak out against Georgia's voter suppression law. Now, Georgia Governor Brian Kemp isn't too happy about the fact that the MLB, for instance, is moving its All-Star game out of the state. He explains why in this next clip. Let's hear if he has a case.
Yesterday, Major League Baseball caved to fear and lies from liberal activists. They ignored the facts of our new election integrity law, and they ignored the consequences of their decision on our local community. In the middle of a pandemic, Major League Baseball put the wishes of Stacey Abrams and Joe Biden ahead of the economic well-being of hardworking Georgians who were counting on the All-Star game for a paycheck. Georgians and all Americans should know what this decision means. It means cancel culture and partisan activists are coming for your business. They're coming for your game or event in your hometown. And they're coming to cancel everything from sports to how you make a living. And they will stop at nothing to silence all of us. I want to be clear. I will not be backing down from this fight. And neither are the people who are here with me today. We will not be intimidated, and we will also not be silenced. Major League Baseball, Coca-Cola, and Delta may be scared of Stacey Abrams, Joe Biden, and the left, but I am not, and we are not as well.
I mean, it's really in the Republicans' best interest to pretend like they're unafraid and not intimidated in any way by potential boycotts. Because really, when you look at the fact that the Republican Party is unwilling to take a good hard look at its own platform and how unpopular it is, and instead their political survival is just gonna rely on them rigging the system to their advantage, yeah, they're gonna keep fighting this. They're gonna continue trying to intimidate anyone who dare criticize the law or dare to boycott the state as a result of the suppression laws. But make no mistake about it, despite what GOP lawmakers or talking heads would have you believe, this is by far one of the most ridiculous and severe voter suppression laws. And they keep arguing about how it actually expands voting, but it expands voting in very specific parts of Georgia, while really restricting and limiting voting, making it far more difficult to vote in parts of the state that are predominantly African American. So I'll give you all of those details in just a minute. But that's the growing talking point, Francesca, that we're hearing right now, that this is really a voter expansion bill or law at this point.
Yeah, exactly. I'm surprised he didn't just bring up like Mr. and Mrs. Potato Head and have them, sort of voice that we still want to be in Atlanta. We love Georgia. Hey, whatever. Like that's the level of sense that Kemp is making. This is a guy who rigged his own election for governor while he was Secretary of State, overseeing that election, robbing Stacey Abrams, and then turns around and takes away that electoral oversight from the current Secretary of State and hands it to Republican state legislators. Like this is a guy who has rigged the entire system in Georgia for himself. He has personally canceled the votes of many Black and Latino Georgians who stood in line to cast their ballot for Stacey Abrams in 2018 and were not able to do so because of how few polling places there were. So talking about cancel culture, like let us just untie and untwist this BS knot that they're trying to craft here. They are canceling like democracy in Georgia, and we can talk about the strategies for trying to undo that, but yes, what a nonsensical discussion.
Exactly, and I think what they're concerned about following the MLB's decision is that it would lead to some sort of domino effect with other Georgia-based companies maybe moving business out of town, out of state. I think that that's unlikely to happen, and we're gonna ask you about it in one of our polls. But first, let me give you some more details. I wanna make the case. So obviously, Kemp is not the only Republican who has spoken out against the MLB. You also have Chris Christie, the disgraced former governor of New Jersey, a man who has been wrapped up in his own scandals, someone who has no business opining on any political issue as if he's a legitimate person to hear an opinion from. But nonetheless, he's upset at the way that this legislation or this now law is being portrayed in the press and by people like Joe Biden. Let's watch.
Was this the right move for the MLB?
Listen, it's just a symptom. George, it's a symptom of what's going on in our country right now. I sat here and listened to the president's inaugural address, and I just want a couple of real quick points from it. Politics need not be a raging fire that destroys everything in its path. Every disagreement doesn't have to be a cause for total war, and we must reject a culture in which facts themselves are manipulated or made up. And Joe Biden's broken his own rule, 84 days. And now he's lying to the American people, George. He's lying about this bill. He's lying to the American people about it to cause the raging fire he said he was going to put out. I'm very disappointed.
He's very disappointed, Francesca. He's very disappointed because it turns out that this is actually a great law that expands voting for white rural voters in the state of Georgia. And I think it's really important to give you guys this detail because it's a growing narrative that seems to go unchallenged for the most part. In fact, what you're likely to hear conservatives argue is that there was some real fact checking taking place over at the Washington Post. Suddenly they're big fans of the Washington Post. And so I was like, oh, well, maybe there's something that I was misled about. I don't wanna spread misinformation to our audience. I wanna make sure that I'm correct. And so I went in and took a look at that Washington Post article that they were talking about. I'm gonna read you a few excerpts of it right now. So here we go. This is from Peter Stevenson, Washington Post, who writes, a close examination of the language in the laws show it does contain new restrictions on voting. Some are likely to make it disproportionately more difficult for poorer voters and voters of color to cast their ballots. So let's give you some specific details. The Hill reports that in the 2020 election, where there was no voter fraud, by the way, there were 94 drop boxes for ballots across the 4 counties that make up the Atlanta metropolitan area, while the new law limits the same counties to a total number of 23 drop boxes in the future. So 23 drop boxes might not sound like that little, right? Maybe that's enough, except we're talking about the most populous part of Georgia. So clearly they had the 94 drop boxes for a reason, severely limiting the number of drop boxes in the most populous part of the state, where you have a higher percentage of black voters is obviously sending a message here. Voters will have less time to request absentee ballots. There will be strict new identification requirements for absentee ballots. And while early voting will be expanded in some of these small counties, it won't be in more populous ones. Rather than allowing voters, for instance, to request ballots 6 months from election day, the new law says voters can start requesting ballots 78 days out. Counties can begin sending ballots to voters just 29 days before election day, rather than the previous 49 days, which by the way is actually pretty serious because critics say any mail delays with these shorter periods could lead to voters not getting ballots on time or not being able to return them in time. I mean, the list goes on and on. I'm not even done. I just don't want to go on a lengthy rant where I'm just reading graphics about how awful this legislation was, but it's awful. The fact that it's now law is awful. They took out the provision regarding souls to polls where they would prevent people from voting on Sundays after church. Obviously, that was meant to target African-American voters, but don't get it twisted. The final version of that legislation that was signed into law is horrendous and is specifically trying to rig the election to the Republicans' advantage. I'll give you more details if you want, Francesca, but I do want to hear more from you.
Yeah, I mean, it's so bald-faced. Like, I don't understand. We have to understand that all of this is a distraction. Talking about cancel culture and all of that, it's a complete distraction from the fact that they're still mad that they lost in the 2020 election. That they sent 2 terrible candidates to go up against 2 Democrats in the Senate, and they flipped the Senate blue, and the state went blue itself to Joe Biden. That's what they're mad about. That's it. And I just want to mention just something about the corporations. Coca-Cola and Delta are not heroes here, okay?
No,
corporations
no.
are never the heroes. Exactly. What corporations are the middleist of the road, skewing conservative. They are a conservative, middle of the road barometer of what they think is safe or not safe for making money. Straight up, they've never been on the forefront of history. In fact, the only reason that Delta and Coca-Cola even issued those statements was because I think something like 75 black business leaders called upon them to say something and to do something they weren't going to, and then they made a statement, which is like not even a big deal, kind of a toothless thing. But so once again, situate the Republican Party in the year 2021 with all of these nationalist fascist tendencies next to corporations with once again the moderate conservative line, and there's this entire gulf where you realize these Republicans are on so much, not just the wrong side of history in the year 2021, but the wrong side of history in the year 1945, right? Like they're so behind. And so once again, these guys they're not our saviors, but like to get mad at their statements because they believe in people voting, oof, that says a lot about you.
Yeah, and look, there has been growing calls for companies that are based in Georgia to say something, right? To speak out. And look, some of them, yes, have spoken out. Coca-Cola has spoken out, Delta has spoken out. There's been a long list of companies that have been willing to pay lip service to the concerns of those who are watching our democracy deteriorate right before our very eyes. But remember, these are also companies who have been part and parcel of the legalized bribery and corruption that undermines democracy. So to think that they're gonna save us, I think is incredibly naive. I would be a little more, I guess, open to what they're saying if they were actually putting action behind those words. Now the MLB did, but remember the MLB is not headquartered in Georgia. They're just moving their all-star game, and I commend them for that. That was a good move. However, it's something entirely different for a Georgia-based company like Coca-Cola to literally get up and leave. And I don't want the people of Georgia to suffer, but my point here is talk is cheap. And if that's all you're looking for, if you're looking for a company or a CEO to pay lip service, all right, you might get it, but that's not really gonna change anything.
Absolutely, and it's a good debate, right? Ilhan Omar is on one side saying yes to boycotts. They've worked in the past. I mean, in fact, speaking of the South, right? This is the legacy of boycotts and the legacy of the civil rights movement go hand in hand. And then you have Stacey Abrams who's like, no, stay and fight. And you can sort of make an argument for both. As someone who feels like Georgia, and this is not from a crass political point, but Georgia's in play, Georgia flipped blue, and because of a lot of people fighting. So there is a huge argument to make for people to fight. And for people to fight on a local level, because if the state legislature weren't in Republican hands, we'd be in a different situation right now. So it's hard to know what to do because I mean, I think Georgia Republicans are gonna miss the jobs, but they don't care. They'll just get another. I mean, maybe there more Amazon warehouses will come in and they can just, race to the bottom. Like maybe, who knows? They have such little respect for their own citizens that you're like, I don't want to leave them to the wolves. That's not to say Delta is like a beautiful employer. We know that's not true.
Right, and we want to hear what you guys think. So we do have a poll on this. I'm really curious what you guys predict will happen. Will Atlanta-based companies like Delta and Coca-Cola actually move their business out of state? And you got two options there, yes or no. Go to tyt.com/polls to participate. Can't wait to hear what you guys have to say.
Thanks for watching the Young Turks. We really appreciate it. Another way to show support is through YouTube memberships. You'll get to interact with us more. There's live chat emojis, badges. You've got emojis of me, Anna, John, JR. So those are super fun. But you also get playback of our exclusive member-only shows and specials right after they air. So all of that, all you gotta do is click that join button right underneath the video. Thank you.